Hello and welcome. It's 10 a.m. on Tuesday, the 10th of June. You're tuned into our mid-morning newscast here on ARIRANG TV. Let's take a look at what's making the headlines. Koreans await President Park's nominee for Prime Minister. The nomination is expected to spark a cabinet reshuffle as the president looks to push ahead with her reform drive following last week's local elections. A document dating back to the early 1960s has emerged that shows Japan thought its territorial claims to the Korea-controlled Tokuto Island would not be strong enough to stand up in the International Court of Justice. Plus, the trial for the sunken Soho ferry's captain and crew members begins in Gwangju this Tuesday. The captain and 3 other senior crew members are charged with murder with willful negligence. Our top story this morning, despite speculation to the contrary, Monday came and went with no announcement on the next Prime Minister nominee. Looking to avoid further embarrassment after a first candidate withdrew over previous ethical lapses, President Park Geun-hye is said to be running a fine-tooth comb over the potential candidates this time around. Choi Yu-sun starts us off.
President Park is thought to be seeking a reform-minded figure with ethical integrity to be her next prime minister.
국가 개혁의 적임자로 국민들께서 요구하고 있는 분을 찾고 있습니다.
Nearly 2 weeks after her first nominee, An Dae-hee, resigned amid controversy over privileges he received after retiring as a Supreme Court justice, the president has yet to announce her new pick. It's believed the presidential office has tightened its personnel verification system. When asked Monday if the nomination process is back to square one, spokesperson Min Kyung-wook said that the verification process could be a variable. The announcement will likely come no later than this week, since President Park is scheduled to leave for Central Asia next Monday. To avoid a further delay in the anticipated cabinet reshuffle, there's speculation that the nominee, before being confirmed at a hearing, could play a part in recommending a new cabinet to the president alongside current Prime Minister Chung Hong-won. With the replacement of the presidential press secretary over the weekend, a reshuffle within the presidential office may be gaining momentum. On Saturday, the spokesperson said it was not certain which senior secretaries were subject to replacement, but that a verification process was indeed underway and new names would soon be announced. After the departure of one of the president's closest aides and former press secretary Lee Jung-hyun, observers are now focusing on whether Presidential Chief of Staff Kim Ki-chun will also step down. Choi Yu-sun, ARIRANG News.
Now, staying with domestic politics, some political parties here in Korea are gearing up to make good on their reform pledges. This after last week's local elections ended in a virtual draw. Over the coming weeks, the ruling party will select a new party leader and prepare for by-elections, which come at the end of July. These polls have taken on greater significance given last week's stalemate. Myung-kil reports.
With the campaigning over and the races decided, the ruling Saenuri Party and main opposition party now face a slew of challenges ahead. The ruling party plans to establish a new committee to reform the government's overall management system in the wake of April's ferry disaster.
We expect a new prime minister and new cabinet members. To coincide with President Park Geun-hye's upcoming reshuffle, our party is considering plans to restructure itself.
The Saenuri Party will also hold a party convention on July 14th to nominate a new leader. Meanwhile, the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy also said it would do its best to regain the public's trust.
After the June 4th local elections, what people want is social integrity, a system of checks and balances, and a safer Korea. We will work towards answering the public's demands.
Both parties will also be trying to rally the troops ahead of July 30th by-elections. They are considered important as the number of National Assembly seats up for grabs could be as high as 18. 10 former lawmakers gave up their assembly badges to run in local elections, while 2 lawmakers lost seats for violating election laws. More seats could be available as lawmakers are awaiting rulings on other charges. Political analysts say the outcome of the by-elections could serve as another barometer of public sentiment on the heels of the local elections. The ruling party currently holds 149 seats in parliament and needs just one more seat to resume its majority status at the 300-member National Assembly. Myung-kil, ARIRANG News.
North Korea has recently opened up talks of a diplomatic and trade nature with three of its neighbours, Japan, Russia and China. This coupled with Seoul's chief nuclear envoy heading to Beijing on this Tuesday for talks. It's all raising hope for the resumption of the long-stalled multinational dialogue on North Korea's denuclearization. Our Hwang Sang-hee has this report.
A flurry of diplomatic activity by North Korea is changing the landscape of the six-party nuclear talks. The multilateral dialogue, consisting of the two Koreas, the United States, China, Japan and Russia, has been stalled since December 2008. However, North Korea has recently agreed with Japan to open a reinvestigation into the fate of Japanese citizens abducted by the North in the 1970s and 80s. In return, Tokyo promised to lift its individual sanctions on Pyongyang, which could reduce the regime's economic dependence on Beijing. China, as the chair of the six-party talks and North Korea's biggest economic benefactor, plays a key role in efforts to bring the North back to the negotiating table. Russia has also been moving rapidly to cozy up with North Korea in response to the West's sanctions stemming from the Ukraine crisis. For Pyongyang, this relationship means another opportunity to gain leverage over its dependence on China. And experts say it opens up a chance for dialogue.
Russia and North Korea's mending ties are an appropriate step toward the resumption of dialogue, because Moscow could convince Pyongyang to return to the six-party talks.
And while some experts doubt the validity of the six-party format as a solution to North Korea's nuclear ambitions, most agree that having some form of communication with the communist state is much better than having no communication at all. Hwang Sang-hee, ARIRANG News.
Well, human rights is an area where dialogue is out of the question for Pyongyang. North Korea has threatened to, quote, ruthlessly punish anyone involved with a UN field office set to open in South Korea later this year. Pyongyang's committee in charge of inter-Korean issues says the office, which will investigate the North's human rights violations, is a hideous, politically motivated provocation and a scheme plotted by Washington and Seoul. The committee goes on to deny any rights violations by the regime. After releasing a report detailing Pyongyang's crimes against humanity in February, the UN announced last month that it would run a field office in Seoul to further monitor the situation in the north. New evidence has emerged that shows the Japanese government acknowledged decades ago that its claims to the Korea-controlled Tokuto Island were not worth taking to the International Court of Justice. Despite this, the current Abe administration in Japan continues to threaten to take the case to that court in The Hague. Our Yulian has the details.
A secret government report dating back to 1962 shows Japan knew back then that its claim to the Korea-controlled Tokuto Island was not a case that could be brought to the International Court of Justice. In the report recently released by a civic group in Japan, Tokyo's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the Tokuto issue cannot be categorized as an international dispute, as it arose before Japan announced its compulsory jurisdiction over the island in 1958. The document added that territorial disputes only apply between countries that claim compulsory jurisdiction, but since Korea did not, it said the Tokuto issue cannot be deemed a territorial dispute. The transcript of a closed-door meeting between the then director of the Central Intelligence Agency of Korea, Kim Jong-pil, and former Japanese Prime Minister Hayato Ikeda in 1952 has also been made public. Ikeda told Kim that the issue should be left alone, since Korea is effectively in control of Tokuto Island.
This document proves Japan is making its claim, while it knew from the very beginning that it was completely unjust.
The civic group wants to bring lawsuits against the Japanese government to make public documents related to bilateral talks between Korea and Japan to bring light to historical facts. Yurian, ARIRANG News.
Now, all eyes will be on Gwangju today as the trials for the sunken Soho ferry's captain and crew members will begin down there this Tuesday afternoon. The Gwangju District Court says the first trial for Captain Lee Jun-sok and 14 crew members will start at 2 p.m. Korea time. That's in less than 4 hours. The captain and the 3 other senior crew members are charged with murder with willful negligence. They were among the first people to get off the ferry and they made no attempt to help passengers evacuate. On this first day of the trial, prosecutors and the defense will lay out their positions and apply for evidence to be examined. The key focus is on whether the captain and the 3 other crew members will be found guilty of the most serious charges. Most of the crew partially admit to negligence. Now, in economic news, Korea can count Moodys Investors Service among those who think the Korean economy is well on the path to recovery. The International Credit Ratings Agency said Monday that Asia's 4th largest economy will grow by at least 3.5% this year and the next, this on the back of strong exports. Moodys tempered the expectations a bit, though, saying Korea's heavily indebted public firms and households may have a negative impact on the domestic economy. It added that Korea's rapidly aging population could also weigh on the longer-term potential growth rate. The Korean won has rallied to its strongest level against the US dollar in nearly 6 years. Analysts say the trend comes at a bad time for the country, especially because Korea's exports to major economies, and China in particular, are already suffering. Na Hyung-kyung has this report.
The European Central Bank's easing of monetary policy has driven the Korean won to strengthen even more. On Monday, the local currency rose 0.4% from the previous trading day to close at 1,016 won against the greenback. Experts say this is not a positive development for local exporters.
I think the $1 exchange rate has reached its threshold, with the ECB lowering its benchmark interest rate. The euro is likely going to join the weakening currency trend of the Japanese yen and Chinese yuan. Those will bring down the price competitiveness of Korean exporters even further.
With the Korean won also hitting its highest level against the yuan in nearly 3 years on Monday, analysts add the strengthening trend will send jitters to Korean exporters, especially because shipments to China are slowing. Korea's exports to China fell by more than 9% in May from a year earlier, and things are not likely to improve if the won continues to rise. As for the possibility of the won strengthening past the psychologically important 1,001 mark before the end of September, analysts in Seoul have mixed opinions. Many are not denying the likelihood, but they also suggest the local currency will weaken in the 4th quarter, given that the U.S. economy is on a path of recovery, which could lead the Federal Reserve to raise its key interest rate and strengthen the dollar. Na Hyun-kyung, ARIRANG News.
Now, in another opinion on the outlook for Korea's economic growth, a state-run think tank says that while the Korean economy is regaining its footing, the recent Soho ferry disaster continues to keep domestic consumption down. The Korea Development Institute said in its monthly report on Monday that the nation's major economic indicators, including investment and exports, suggest a pace of moderate recovery, but it added that sectors related to the arts, sports and recreational activities have weakened since the ferry disaster. Last month, the think tank cut its growth outlook for this year by 0.2 percentage points to 3.7%, citing a drop in private consumption. Time now for a look through the international headlines we're following this Tuesday morning. For that, we connect to our Eunice Kim standing by at the news centre. Good morning, Eunice.
Good morning, Mark.
Now, operations at Jinnah International Airport in Karachi have resumed after that awful terror attack that shook the entire country.
That's right, Mark. One day later, we know now that at least 30 people were killed in that attack-turned-5-hour shootout in Pakistan's largest airport. That's an update from the 28 reported earlier, as civil aviation authorities have found 2 more bodies inside a terminal. Among the dead were the 10 gunmen who stormed the major airport prepared in suicide vests, machine guns, grenades, and also a rocket launcher. The assault began around midnight Sunday night local time and continued into early morning, developing into a face-off with security personnel. The Pakistani Taliban has officially claimed responsibility, marking it their largest strike on a state security complex. They say it was in revenge for the death of a former Taliban leader by a U.S. drone strike last November. Iraq continues to be beset with violence. Monday's series of strikes in the country took at least 40 lives, the worst of which targeted Kurdish political party offices in northern Iraq. 22 people died in the double bombings, according to authorities, when 2 truck bombs were detonated one after the other, dealing a blow against bystanders who rushed in following the first explosion. No one has so far claimed responsibility for Monday's attacks, but an al-Qaeda splinter group, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, said they were behind the double bombings on Sunday against Kurdish offices, which killed 19 people. Some 300 protesters packed a São Paulo subway station Monday, sparring with Brazilian riot police who used tear gas to keep them down. Demonstrators have been calling for a 12.2% pay increase since last week, against an 8.8% raise on offer by the state subway company. The strike has threatened a transportation chaos ahead of the opening match of the 2014 World Cup on Friday. Union members say that is not their intention and said they want to negotiate to resolve the disagreement as soon as possible. The subway company says 60 dismissal notices have gone out to staff members involved in the strike. Are we closer to that time when computers and humans are indistinguishable? A supercomputer in London has succeeded in convincing its human test subjects into thinking it was a 13-year-old Eugene Goostman, becoming the first machine to pass the iconic Turing test. The Royal Society in central London said Goostman was successful in fooling 1/3 of its judges that it was human in text-based conversation. And finally, the world's certified oldest man has passed away at the age of 111. Friends and family say Alexander Imich died Sunday in his Upper West Side apartment in New York. The Polish native and Soviet Gulag survivor escaped to the U.S. with his wife during his 40s. He was a chemist and a scholar of the paranormal and had edited an anthology at 93 years of age. Imich was one of 76 supercentenarians worldwide, people who live beyond 110 years, of which only 3 were men.
Said that a team of South Korea.
Get connected to Korea and the world. Join us every weekday for the latest developments out of Korea, Asia, and beyond. On air, on your mobile, and online, we lead the way every day. ARIRANG News.
To try and resolve the crisis in Ukraine, the European Union also offers 15 billion euros. Now, in sports news, South Korea have completed their warm-up schedule for the World Cup in extremely disappointing fashion, losing 4-0 to Ghana in Miami. Terrible defending and goalkeeping by Korea in the 11th minute saw Jordan Ayew's deflected shot find its way into the back of the net. Looking in complete control the whole game, Ghana's captain Asamoah Gyan scored the second in the 43rd minute. Ayew scored his second and on the 55th minute and got his hat-trick, in fact, just before the final whistle. This was Korea's last warm-up match before the World Cup in Brazil. Korea's first World Cup game against Russia kicks off at 7 a.m. Korea time on Wednesday, June 18th. Now to some happier cultural news. Violinist Jung Kyung-hwa is one of Korea's musical legends. Our Park Ji-won was lucky enough to have a chat with her about her 5 decades in the classical music business.
Korean classical music legend Chung Kyung-hwa, who has been leading a successful career spanning nearly 50 years, recalls her first encounter with the violin.
What I loved about the violin when I started when I was 6 was the freedom. I felt that the instrument was very intimate, and it also presented a voice. And so from then on, it became a very pure fascination for me.
Since winning the Leventree competition in 1967 at the age of 19, she has become one of the world's first Asian classical musicians to reach star status on the global stage. She also shared part of her music career in the Chung Trio, along with her sister cellist Chung Myung-hwa and brother maestro conductor Chung Myung-hoon.
I had a very, very busy career until I had 2 children. I was very lucky to have this active career as a young performer.
She's been hailed by fans and music critics alike for her passionate yet delicate playing that could resonate with almost any period of classical music, from Bach and Beethoven to modern composers like Stravinsky. She says her Guarnerius violin, which she acquired in 1983, is her voice.
This instrument is so human. Once I've been in touch with Guarnerius, there is nothing that comes closer to my soul than this instrument.
In 2005, she suffered a finger injury. Thinking her violin playing days were over, she began teaching at Juilliard and co-directing the Great Mountains Music Festival. By 2010, her finger healed, allowing her to fully return to playing on international stages and in charity concerts, such as the one she will perform at the Seoul Arts Center this Friday.
I started as a dream of having a big solo career, but it's not a single voice I am looking for now. It is harmonious voice. Unless we care for each other and find the voice of each other and tune it together, we will not find the harmony.
In addition to her China tour in October, Chung will also play at the Royal Festival Hall in London on December 2nd, on the stage where her international career took off. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
And a good Tuesday morning to you all as we kick things off in the LPGA, where Park Geun-hye, after winning her first LPGA title of the season over the weekend, has her eyes set on that #1 LPGA ranking once again. Despite the amazing victory at the Manulife Financial LPGA Classic and Stacey Lewis finishing tied for 8th place, it wasn't enough for the South Korean to retake the #1 ranking. However, she's not too far back as she has a chance to take that title back after the U.S. Women's Open, which will take place next week. Meanwhile, Lydia Ko looks to close in on the top spot as well, as she finished just ahead of Lewis at 7th place over the weekend. And now over to the K-League Classic this time, as Pohang Steelers' Myung-kil is headed over to the UAE on a record-breaking transfer fee. The 24-year-old, who won the Rookie of the Year honors last season, is headed over to Al Ain in the UAE for the record-breaking transfer fee of $5 million. Myung-kil also agreed to a 3-year deal, which will pay him $1.5 million per season, as the transfer fee shatters the previous record when Ki Sung-young was sold to Celtic for $3.6 million back in 2009. And over to the KBO this time, where Park Byung-ho of the Nexen Heroes is having a season to remember, and it's only June. Well, it's because he's on pace to break the KBO single-season home run record held by Lee Seung-yup. Now, so far after 55 games, the Nexen Heroes slugger has hit 26 home runs so far, leading the league by 9 home runs. Although most of those home runs were hit in Mukdong Stadium, a ballpark notorious for having a shorter fence, it doesn't take away the fact that he's still on pace to break that single-season home run record of 56, held by Lee Seung-yup of the Samsung Lions. And now finishing things off with Game 2 of the NBA Finals between the San Antonio Spurs and the Miami Heat. The AC wasn't broken this time, and LeBron James didn't have cramps, which meant Miami had a good chance of tying up the series.
And they did just that as they rallied back in this game despite the Spurs controlling the game for most of the first half. But with LeBron James coming back healthy after that leg cramp in Game 1, he scores 35 points in just over 37 minutes as Miami tied the series up at 1 apiece with a 98-96 victory. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day and see you guys again for your sports needs.
And that's all we have for now. We'll be back with another newscast at noon Korea time. Until then, goodbye.